Far beyond the outer spiral arms, where stars burned cold and silent, the Imperial cruiser Silver Dawn moved through deep space like a shining blade. Inside its vast halls walked warriors from many worlds, all sworn to protect Empress Lyra, ruler of a powerful interstellar empire built on unity rather than conquest. Her presence brought calm even in uncertain times, and her reputation had turned former enemies into allies. Yet peace in the galaxy was fragile, and even the strongest empires lived under the shadow of betrayal. Among the elite guards assigned to the Empress was a human named Adrian Hale. He did not stand out like the others. Many guards were tall, armored beings, enhanced by advanced technology or evolved under harsh conditions that made them naturally powerful. Adrian looked ordinary by comparison. He wore standard armor, carried simple equipment, and spoke little unless necessary. Some warriors saw him as an experiment, a new species placed in an important role for political reasons rather than merit. Adrian did not argue with their opinions. He had joined the Imperial service after leaving behind a life filled with loss. Years earlier, he had worked as a rescue pilot during a colony disaster where he had saved many but failed to save those closest to him. That memory stayed with him. It shaped how he saw duty. Protection to him was not about glory or reputation. It was about standing between danger and someone who could not escape. The Empress noticed him early during his assignment. Unlike other guards who watched her with reverence or fear, Adrian observed quietly, focusing more on the environment than on her status. She respected that. Leadership had taught her that true loyalty often appeared in simple actions rather than dramatic words. The cruiser traveled toward a diplomatic meeting with a distant alliance, a journey meant to strengthen peace between species that once fought brutal wars. Most aboard the ship believed the route was safe. Imperial intelligence had cleared the sector, and escort vessels surrounded the cruiser in perfect formation. Inside the grand observation hall, Empress Lyra stood near a wide window overlooking endless stars. Her long cloak moved gently with the ship's artificial gravity currents. Advisors spoke softly nearby, discussing political outcomes and future agreements. Adrian stood several steps behind her, part of a rotating guard formation. His eyes moved constantly, scanning entrances, reflections, and shadows. "Human?" said a tall alien guard beside him, his voice low and slightly amused. "You watch like prey expecting attack," Adrian answered calmly.
"I watch like someone who knows peace can change fast." The alien gave a small nod, unsure whether to laugh or agree.
Moments later, alarms shattered the calm. A deep vibration ran through the ship. Lights flickered. The steady hum of engines shifted into a sharp warning tone. Red emergency symbols flashed across the walls. "Impact detected!" shouted a crew member over the intercom. "Unknown vessels emerging from stealth." The cruiser shook again as explosions struck its outer shields. Outside the window, flashes of energy lit the darkness. Escort ships moved into defensive positions, but several disappeared in sudden bursts of light, their signals vanishing from the tactical display. The grand hall transformed instantly. Guards formed defensive lines around the Empress. Advisors rushed toward emergency exits. Doors sealed automatically, isolating damaged sections of the ship.
Adrian's training took over.
He activated his comm device, but static filled the channel. Someone had jammed internal communication systems. "Ambush!" muttered one of the commanders. "How did they reach us without detection?" Another explosion rocked the ship, sending a wave of force through the floor. One of the wall panels burst open, releasing smoke into the hall. "Evacuation protocol!" ordered the senior commander. "We move the Empress to escape pods immediately." She followed without panic, her expression steady despite the chaos. Adrian moved with the group, but his attention caught something unusual. On a nearby display, he saw energy signatures appearing inside the ship rather than outside. Boarding units. "They're already inside," he said quickly. Before anyone could respond, a section of the corridor ahead exploded inward. Dark figures stepped through the smoke, their armor shifting colors like liquid metal. They moved silently, weapons glowing with unfamiliar energy. The guards fired instantly. Bright flashes filled the hallway, but something was wrong. Some shots passed through illusions, striking only empty air. The attackers used advanced projection technology, confusing targeting systems. One guard fell as a weapon discharged silently, sending a pulse of force that knocked him backward. "Fall back!" shouted the commander. The group retreated, forming a tighter protective circle around the Empress. Adrian noticed hesitation among some warriors. The enemy's tactics were unfamiliar, and uncertainty created fear. Another blast shook the ship. Emergency lighting dimmed. Smoke thickened, reducing visibility. The commander spoke again, voice sharp. "Priority is survival of the Empress. We retreat to escape routes." Several guards moved quickly, but the corridor behind them began collapsing as hull damage spread. Debris blocked easy passage. Adrian stepped forward, studying the attackers' movement patterns. They advanced slowly, almost testing reactions rather than rushing for immediate victory. "They want us to run," he said, quietly. The Empress glanced toward him.
"Explain. They're pushing us into panic," Adrian replied. "If we scatter, they control the fight." Another guard shook his head.
"We cannot hold against unknown technology. Retreat is logical." Adrian did not argue further, but he noticed that retreating required leaving certain defensive positions unguarded. That would expose the Empress during movement. As the group moved toward an alternate route, another explosion separated several guards from the main formation. The corridor split by falling debris, forcing difficult decisions. The commander hesitated only a moment before ordering, "Continue forward!" Some warriors obeyed immediately, focusing on reaching safety. Adrian turned back toward the attackers. They were closer now, their silent steps steady and confident. He stepped away from the moving group. "What are you doing?" asked a guard. "Buying time," Adrian answered. He pulled a damaged control panel from the wall and began connecting exposed wires with practiced speed. Sparks flew as he forced emergency doors to close halfway, creating a narrow passage that slowed the enemy advance. The Empress stopped walking and looked back. Human returned to formation. Adrian shook his head slightly. "If we keep moving now, they'll reach you before the next barrier." One of the alien warriors protested. "You cannot hold them alone." "Maybe not," Adrian said, "but I can make them work for every step." Energy blasts struck the door, causing metal to glow. Adrian ducked behind a fallen panel and triggered another system, releasing a burst of steam that filled the corridor with thick fog. For a moment, the enemy slowed. The Empress watched him carefully. Many of her guards had chosen tactical retreat, trusting strategy over personal risk. This human chose something different, and standing firm even when odds looked impossible. "Empress," urged the commander, "we must go." She hesitated, then nodded slowly. "We move, but not far. Maintain contact with the human." They advanced deeper into the ship, but Adrian remained behind, creating obstacle after obstacle. He overturned storage units, rerouted power lines, and sealed bulkheads manually when automated systems failed. Each second increased the distance between the attackers and the Empress. As smoke filled the corridor, Adrian's breathing grew heavy. His armor registered rising temperature warnings. Still, he stayed. Finally, the enemy broke through the damaged door. Their silhouettes appeared through the fog, glowing faintly. Adrian raised his weapon, steady despite exhaustion. He did not know if he could win. He only knew that someone needed to stand. Behind him, far down the corridor, the Empress paused once more and looked back toward the human who refused to retreat. In that moment, she understood something about humanity that no report or diplomatic speech had captured. Humans were not always the strongest or the most advanced, but sometimes, when others calculated survival, they chose to protect instead. The battle had only begun, and the fate of the Empire hung in uncertain balance. Yet, in a broken corridor filled with smoke and flickering light, one human stood firm, becoming the shield that allowed hope to move forward. Adrian's visor kept blinking warnings, but he ignored them. Heat, smoke density, air quality dropping.
The ship's systems were struggling, and the corridor around him felt like a wounded animal trying to breathe.
The attackers stepped through the fog without panic. Their armor shimmered, changing colors with every movement, as if the hallway lights were being swallowed and returned in different shades. They did not speak. They did not shout. Their silence was the most frightening part. Adrian held his position behind a fallen panel, weapon raised, shoulders tight. He fired a controlled burst toward the first shape. The shot struck something solid and sparked against a shield. The enemy barely moved. Another figure lifted a hand, and the fog swirled like it was pulled by invisible strings. Adrian's comm was still full of static, but a faint signal appeared for 1 second, then vanished. Someone was trying to reconnect internal channels. He backed up 2 steps and slapped a strip of emergency sealant onto a cracked wall joint. He had noticed earlier that the hull fracture here was unstable. If he could trigger a pressure change, debris might collapse in the enemy's path. He popped open a damaged maintenance hatch and pulled out a small gravity stabilizer module. It was not meant to be used like this, but he had once worked on rescue ships where nothing was used the way manuals described. He forced 2 wires together. The module hummed. The enemy advanced again. Adrian threw the module down the corridor and fired at it. The impact jolted its unstable power. Gravity shifted suddenly. The attackers stumbled as the floor seemed to tilt. Loose debris lifted, then crashed down with a loud slam. The corridor filled with a fresh cloud of dust. Adrian used that moment to retreat, not running away, but moving in measured steps toward the next junction. His goal was not to win. His goal was to slow. He turned a corner and saw another set of emergency doors. The control panel was dead, but the manual override wheel still worked. He grabbed it and began turning. It resisted at first, then started moving with a groan. Behind him, the attackers pushed through the debris. Their silhouettes appeared again, unbroken, almost patient. The door closed halfway. Adrian stopped turning and wedged a metal rod into the mechanism. It would not hold forever, but it would buy time. He looked down the corridor where the Empress had gone. The emergency lights flickered, and he spotted distant movement. A few guards still escorting her, moving toward a safer interior section. His chest tightened with a brief, bitter thought. Many had run. They had followed protocol, not courage. But anger would not help him. He focused on the next step. A soft voice came through his comm for the first time, weak but clear. Adrian.
It was the Empress.
He froze for half a heartbeat, surprised she had found a channel.
Your signal is faint, she continued.
Where are you now? 2 junctions behind your last turn, Adrian said. They're still coming. A pause, then her voice returned, steady as ever. Why did you stay? The question struck him harder than the enemy's weapons. It was not accusation. It was genuine curiosity, almost disbelief. Adrian glanced back at the shaking door behind him as the attackers hit it with repeated force.
Metal screeched. Because you're not just a symbol, he said.
You're a person, and people don't get left behind. For a moment, there was only static again. Then she spoke softly. You are injured.
It's nothing, he lied. His left shoulder ached where a shockwave had slammed him into the wall earlier.
His suit's inner lining felt warm with a small cut. He kept moving. He heard shouting far ahead, not from the attackers, but from the Empress's guards. They had reached another blocked path. Adrian turned quickly and ran toward them. His boots hit scattered debris, sparks flying when he stepped on exposed wiring. He reached a wider passage where the ceiling had partially collapsed. A thick beam had fallen diagonally across the corridor, leaving a narrow space underneath. 2 alien guards tried to lift it but struggled because the beam was locked by warped metal. The Empress stood behind them, calm but alert. Her eyes met Adrian's, and for an instant, he saw gratitude mixed with worry. "Human," the senior commander snapped. "You should not be here." He examined the beam, then the wall. He saw a maintenance jack embedded in a side panel, a tool meant to support bulkheads during repairs. He pulled the jack free, extended it, and positioned it under the beam. "Hold it steady," he told the guards. They looked at him, unsure, but followed. Adrian cranked the jack. It lifted the beam slowly, metal groaning. The gap widened by a few inches. "Now," Adrian said, "move the Empress through." She ducked and stepped through with controlled grace. Adrian followed last. Once everyone was past, he released the jack, letting the beam drop back down. The corridor behind them was blocked again. The commander looked at Adrian like he was seeing him for the first time. "You used salvage methods. Improper." Adrian wiped sweat from his brow. "Proper doesn't matter if you're dead." Before the commander could respond, an explosion sounded behind the beam. The attackers had reached the other side. They were not delayed for long. "We need a safer position," Adrian said, looking down intersecting corridors. "Somewhere narrow. Something we can control."
One guard spoke quickly.
The escape pods are 2 levels down. Adrian shook his head.
They'll expect that. They're driving us.
"We need a place they don't know." The Empress stepped forward.
There is an old command chamber. It is not on standard maps.
Several guards exchanged uneasy looks. Ancient systems on Imperial ships were often sealed, used only in emergencies. They were not meant for modern movement.
"It was built before current alliances," the Empress continued.
"Before we trusted routes to stay safe." Adrian nodded. "Then that's where we go." They moved through tight corridors, cutting away from main routes. The ship's air grew colder. Emergency lighting faded into dim blue strips. The walls changed too, less polished, older alloys, engraved lines that hinted at ancient design. As they traveled, Adrian noticed something odd. The attackers were not charging. They followed. Even when barriers slowed them, they did not grow desperate. That behavior felt wrong. "They're guiding us," he murmured. The Empress heard him. "Toward what?" "I don't know," Adrian admitted. "But they're not wasting energy."
They want us to make choices for them. The senior commander's jaw tightened.
"This is unacceptable. We should have held the defensive formation at the beginning."
Adrian looked at him. "Then why didn't you?" The commander's eyes flashed, but he did not answer. The truth was simple. Fear, confusion, and unfamiliar technology had made even elite warriors hesitate. They reached a sealed door with no visible control panel. The Empress placed her palm against the center. A hidden scanner activated, sweeping her hand with faint light. The door unlocked with a deep, old sound. Inside was a chamber shaped like a half-circle. The walls were thicker, built to withstand impacts. A central platform held an ancient console with a dark, inactive screen. Dust floated in the air, disturbed only by their entry. The Empress approached the console. This room was designed for worst-case scenarios. One guard looked around.
"It feels like a tomb." "It is a shelter," the Empress said. Then she turned to Adrian.
"Can you activate it?" Adrian stepped forward and examined the console.
The interface was not human, but technology always followed patterns.
Power, input, output. He pried open a panel and found a manual power connector. With quick hands, he rerouted energy from an emergency line. The console flickered, then came to life. A soft hum filled the chamber. The air became cleaner as internal filtration systems started. "Good," Adrian said. Now we can hold here. With what? We are few.
Their weapons are unknown.
Adrian looked at the walls and smiled slightly. With the room itself. He scanned the chamber and found old defense ports, sealed slots along the walls that could open for automated turrets or shield emitters. Most were inactive, but some still had dormant power lines. He turned to the guards. Help me. We're going to wake up anything that still works. They hesitated, then obeyed. Desperation made people flexible. As they worked, the Empress stood close, observing Adrian. She spoke quietly so only he could hear. When my warriors withdrew, I thought it was strategy. Adrian kept his hands moving.
Maybe it was, but you stayed, she said. That was not strategy.
It was choice. The ship trembled again. A distant blast echoed through the corridors. Maybe... The attackers were nearing the chamber. Adrian placed a small device on the floor, a motion sensor from his kit, and connected it to an old defense port.
If the system recognizes movement, he explained to a guard, this port might fire an energy pulse automatically.
The guard blinked. Might? Welcome to human engineering. One by one, they activated 3 defense ports. Not many, but enough to shape the battlefield. Adrian also found a narrow entry corridor leading into the chamber. Perfect. Attackers would have to funnel through. He instructed 2 guards to stand behind the central platform, where they had clear lines of fire without being exposed. He placed another guard near the door mechanism, ready to close it at the right time. The commander watched, unsettled.
You are taking control, Adrian answered calmly.
Someone has to. The Empress did not object. In fact, she stepped aside, giving him space. Her silence was approval. Then the motion sensor beeped softly. Contacts, Adrian said.
They're here. The door shook as something struck it from outside. The ancient door held, but the impact was powerful.
Adrian positioned himself closest to the entry. His weapon was ready, but he also held a small tool in his left hand, a magnetic clamp he could use to jam the door at a critical moment. The Empress stood behind him, her posture straight. She looked like royalty, even in dim light, but Adrian could sense the danger pressing close. This was not a political game now. This was survival. The door buckled again, and a thin crack appeared along the seam. A voice suddenly came from outside, distorted but understandable, as if translated through a system.
Empress Lyra, you have run far enough.
Adrian's heart beat faster. The attackers could speak. They chose not to until now. The voice continued. Your warriors have abandoned you. Your empire is built on weakness. The commander growled, raising his weapon, but the Empress raised a hand to calm him. Her voice was clear when she answered. My empire is built on choice, she said. And today I see who truly chooses to stand. Adrian felt a chill. The words were not for the enemy. They were for her own people. The door finally gave way with a loud snap. It slid open halfway, forced by enemy power. Shadows poured into the corridor beyond the chamber like ink spilling into water. Adrian fired. His shot struck the first attacker's shield, creating a bright flare. The defense ports activated, releasing pulses that slammed into the corridor walls. One attacker stumbled back. The enemy returned fire, sending silent blasts that cracked the floor and scorched the doorway edges. Smoke filled the entry passage. Adrian adjusted, aiming low, forcing the attackers to react. The guards behind him fired in coordinated rhythm. For the first time since the ambush began, They were not retreating. They were holding. A glowing device rolled into the corridor, a small sphere that emitted a pulsing light. The guards flinched as their vision blurred. Adrian shouted, "Don't look at it directly!" He turned away, using his visor's filtered view. He picked up a piece of debris and threw it at the sphere. The impact knocked it sideways, and one of the defense ports struck it with a pulse, shattering it. The enemy advanced again, slower now, more cautious. Adrian realized something important in that moment. The attackers were not unstoppable. They relied on fear, confusion, and surprise. Once defenders adapted, their advantage shrank. The Empress stepped closer to Adrian, her voice calm. "You learn quickly. We don't have a choice."
Another attacker lifted a weapon aimed directly toward the Empress's position, possibly having spotted her silhouette. Adrian moved without thinking.
He stepped in front of her, taking the line of fire. The blast struck his armor, throwing him backward onto the floor. Pain flared through his side. His breath left him in a sharp gasp. For a second, his vision blurred. The guards shouted. The commander rushed forward, angry and alarmed. Adrian forced himself up on one knee, shaking off dizziness. His armor had absorbed most of the impact, but the hit had cracked a plate. He could feel bruising beneath. The Empress knelt beside him for the first time, lowering herself to his level.
"You are hurt." Adrian breathed hard.
Still standing, her eyes held something deeper than surprise now. Respect, and perhaps something like understanding. The attackers paused at the doorway again, as if watching, as if measuring. That made Adrian uneasy. They should be rushing if their mission was quick elimination. Instead, they seemed to be waiting for something. A mistake, a surrender, a moment of weakness. Adrian gripped his weapon tighter. He glanced at the commander and the other guards, then at the Empress.
"Listen," he said, voice rough but clear.
They're not just trying to defeat us, they're trying to break us.
"Don't let them." The Empress rose smoothly, her cloak settling. "We will not break." Outside the chamber, the attackers shifted position, preparing for another push. The doorframe glowed from repeated impacts. The air hummed with unstable energy. Adrian adjusted the magnetic clamp in his hand, ready to jam the door at the right moment and trap attackers in the narrow corridor under the defense ports. He took a deep breath. His body hurt, but his mind was sharp. This was not just a fight for survival anymore. It was a test. For the Empress, for her warriors, and for humanity's place in a galaxy that still did not understand what humans could do when they refused to run. The next wave would come harder. Adrian set his feet, raised his weapon, and stayed exactly where he needed to be, between the Empress and the darkness pressing at the door. The chamber trembled as another wave of force struck the doorway. Dust fell from the ceiling in thin streams, drifting slowly through the cold air. The ancient defense ports hummed faintly, ready but fragile, as if they were waking from a long sleep. Adrian stood steady, despite the ache spreading through his body. The impact he had taken earlier left his armor cracked and his side sore, but he ignored the pain. He focused only on the doorway and the shadows moving beyond it. The attackers advanced again, slower and more careful this time. They had learned that rushing into the chamber would cost them. Their movements were precise, almost graceful, like hunters testing prey. Behind Adrian, the Empress watched silently. Her presence felt calm even as danger grew closer. The remaining guards formed a defensive arc, their earlier hesitation replaced by determination. Something had changed in them. They had seen a human stand alone and refuse to retreat, and it stirred something deeper than pride. One of the attackers stepped into the doorway fully, raising a weapon that pulsed with unfamiliar light. Adrian fired immediately. The defense ports activated at the same moment, sending waves of energy that forced the attacker backward. "Hold formation," Adrian said, his voice firm but calm. The commander nodded, this time without argument. The attackers tried a new tactic. Small hovering devices rolled into the corridor, projecting shifting images across the walls. Illusions of additional enemies appeared, creating confusion about numbers and positions. Several guards hesitated, unsure which targets were real.
Don't chase movement!
Adrian called out. Watch for shadows on the floor. Real ones block light. The guards adjusted their aim, focusing only on solid forms. Shots became more accurate. One attacker stumbled as their shield failed under concentrated fire. The Empress stepped closer to Adrian. You adapt quickly. Humans learn fast when survival depends on it, he replied without turning. She watched him for a moment, studying the quiet determination in his movements.
My warriors were trained for structured battles, she said softly.
Not this. This isn't about structure, Adrian said. It's about refusing to give them control. The attackers pulled back slightly, regrouping beyond the doorway. The pause felt heavy, like the silence before a storm. A new voice came through the corridor, clearer than before.
Impressive, human. The tone carried neither anger nor respect, only curiosity. Adrian kept his weapon ready.
If you're here to talk, step forward without weapons. A faint sound like a laugh echoed.
You misunderstand. Conversation is only part of the test. The word test made Adrian's grip tighten. What test? Asked the Empress, her voice calm but sharp. To see whether your empire deserves to survive, the voice replied. You speak of unity, yet your warriors abandoned you when faced with uncertainty. Only one remained. Silence followed. The accusation hung heavy in the air. The commander lowered his head slightly, shame visible even through his armor. The Empress did not react outwardly. And you believe this proves something?
It proves weakness, the voice answered.
An empire led by fear will fall. Adrian spoke before she could respond. Then why are you still talking? If you wanted her dead, you would have finished it already.
Another pause. Another pause.
Because, the voice said slowly, we wanted to see if she would stand alone, or if someone unexpected would stand with her.
Adrian exchanged a quick glance with the Empress. The attacker's behavior made more sense now.
They had pressured, guided, and observed rather than overwhelming immediately.
That's a dangerous game, Adrian said.
Perhaps, the voice replied, but it has revealed truths. The attackers advanced again, this time without illusions. Pure force. Adrian triggered the magnetic clamp at the perfect moment, jamming part of the doorway so only one or two enemies could enter at once. The narrow funnel turned their numbers into a disadvantage. The guards fired in coordinated bursts. One attacker fell back after a shield collapse. Another deflected shots with a rotating barrier. The chamber filled with flashes of light and echoes of energy impacts. Adrian moved constantly, adjusting angles, guiding the others. He felt less like a single soldier now and more like part of a living system. The guards followed his cues instinctively. Outside the chamber, distant sounds of battle echoed faintly. The commander frowned. Additional combat signatures? Our forces? Adrian listened carefully. He heard new weapon sounds, familiar ones.
They came back, he said quietly.
The guards exchanged surprised looks. More Imperial warriors had returned to the fight, pushing against the attackers from other corridors. The earlier retreat had not been permanent. Regret had turned into resolve. The attackers hesitated for the first time. Adrian saw the shift immediately. Press them, he said. The defense ports fired again, stronger now that Adrian had rerouted additional power. Energy pulses struck the corridor, forcing enemies backward. One attacker stumbled into the chamber, separated from the others. Adrian moved forward quickly, disarming the weapon with a sharp strike. The attacker retreated rather than continuing the fight. They're pulling back, one guard said, disbelief in his voice. Adrian did not relax. Stay ready.
The voice returned. Quieter now.
Enough. The attackers slowly withdrew beyond the doorway. Their silhouettes faded into the dim corridor. Silence filled the chamber, broken only by distant sounds of returning Imperial forces securing nearby areas. The commander lowered his weapon slowly. Why retreat? The Empress stepped forward, her posture tall and steady. Because their objective has changed. Adrian nodded slightly.
They weren't here just to win. They wanted to prove something.
Footsteps approached from outside. Not hostile this time. Imperial warriors entered cautiously, their armor marked by battle. Their eyes widened when they saw Adrian and the Empress standing together at the front line.
We returned as soon as we regrouped,
one said, bowing deeply.
We thought we had lost you. The Empress studied them for a long moment. There was disappointment in her eyes, but also relief.
You chose to return, she said. That matters. Adrian leaned against the wall briefly, letting himself breathe. The immediate danger had passed, but tension still lingered. The commander approached him.
Human Adrian, I misjudged you.
Adrian shrugged slightly. Doesn't matter. We're alive. The Empress turned toward him again. It matters, she said quietly. You stood when others calculated survival. That changes how history will remember this moment.
I just did my job. She gave a small smile. No.
You made a choice. Outside, Imperial forces confirmed that the attackers had withdrawn entirely, leaving only damaged corridors behind. No pursuit signals appeared. It was as if they had simply vanished once their goal was complete. Adrian felt uneasy. Victory without explanation never felt safe. What now? He asked. The Empress looked toward the doorway, then back at her guards.
Now we rebuild trust, she said. Her gaze returned to Adrian last. And we learn from those who stand firm even when fear tells them to run.
The chamber felt different now. No longer a desperate shelter, but a place where something had changed. Not just the outcome of a battle, but the understanding between species and leaders. The human who had once seemed ordinary now stood at the center of that change. Not because he sought recognition, but because he refused to step aside when someone needed protection. Outside, stars continued to burn quietly, unaware that a small moment of courage had begun reshaping how an entire empire would view humanity. Silence settled slowly over the damaged corridors of the Imperial cruiser. The echoes of battle faded, replaced by the steady hum of emergency systems trying to restore order. Smoke drifted upward through broken panels, and scattered lights flickered like distant stars, struggling to shine. Adrian stood near the doorway of the ancient chamber, watching returning Imperial soldiers secure the surrounding halls. His body felt heavy now that the fighting had stopped. Pain he had ignored earlier returned in quiet waves. He leaned slightly against the wall, trying not to show how tired he was. The Empress stepped forward beside him. Even after everything, her posture remained calm and strong. She looked toward the corridor where the attackers had disappeared, her expression thoughtful rather than angry. They withdrew too cleanly, she said quietly. Adrian nodded.
Yeah.
That wasn't defeat. That was choice. The commander approached them, removing his helmet. His face carried deep regret. We have confirmed, Your Majesty. The enemy ships vanished from sensor range. No pursuit possible. The Empress remained silent for a moment. Then she turned toward the gathered guards. Many avoided her gaze, shame clear in their movements. You believed retreat would protect me, she said gently. The commander lowered his head. We followed survival protocols, but... We abandoned position. No, she replied calmly.
No!
She replied calmly. You made a decision under fear. The difference between fear and failure is what you choose next.
You returned. Her words lifted some of the tension in the room.
The guard straightened slightly, surprised by her understanding. Adrian watched quietly. Leadership like hers felt different from what he had known in the past. She did not demand perfection. She allowed growth. A medical officer approached Adrian and gestured toward his damaged armor. I'm fine, Adrian said automatically.
You are not fine. Sit.
As the medic examined him, he watched Imperial soldiers moving through the corridor, repairing systems and helping injured comrades. Despite the damage, the ship felt alive again. The commander stepped closer.
Human, Adrian. I owe you an apology. I doubted your presence among us. Adrian shrugged slightly.
You had reasons. Humans are still new here. That is no excuse, the commander said quietly. Strength is not always visible. The Empress listened, then added softly. Today showed that strength comes in many forms. A communication officer rushed into the chamber.
Your Majesty, we intercepted a transmission left behind by the attackers.
It is addressed directly to you.
The room grew still.
Play it, she said. A holographic image appeared above the console. The figure that formed was cloaked in shifting light, its features partially hidden. The same voice that had spoken during the battle filled the room. Empress Lyra, the voice said, we did not come to destroy your empire. We came to reveal its truth. The guards tensed, but the Empress remained calm.
You claim to unite species through trust, the voice continued.
But when faced with uncertainty, your warriors chose safety over loyalty. Only one stood without hesitation. A human. A species many still consider young and unpredictable. Adrian shifted uncomfortably as several guards glanced at him.
This is not an accusation, the voice added. It is a lesson.
Your empire's future depends not on power, but on those willing to stand when fear tells them to flee. Consider this before your next decision. The image faded, leaving only silence. The commander spoke first. They tested us. Yes, the Empress said, and they showed us where we must grow. She turned toward Adrian.
And they showed us something else. He looked confused. What? That humanity may hold qualities our older civilizations have forgotten?
Adrian shook his head slightly.
Humans run too. I'm not special.
You stood when it mattered. That is enough. Repairs continued for several hours.
Gradually, normal lighting returned. Systems stabilized. The cruiser regained communication with the rest of the fleet. Later, the Empress called for a gathering in the central hall, the same place where the attack had begun. Soldiers, officers, and advisors assembled quietly, waiting. Adrian stood at the back, hoping to remain unnoticed. He felt uncomfortable with attention, preferring action over recognition. The Empress stepped forward, her voice calm but strong. But bad. Today we faced an enemy who did not seek conquest, she said. They sought truth, and they revealed something important. Fear exists in all of us. Even the strongest warriors can hesitate when the unknown arrives. No one spoke.
But if you becomes non-engold.
What matters is what we choose after. Many of you returned.
You chose to stand again. That is strength.
Her gaze moved across the room, stopping briefly on Adrian. And one among us stood from the beginning, not because he believed victory was certain, but because he believed protection was necessary. Murmurs spread quietly. Adrian shifted awkwardly, wishing he could disappear. "I name Adrian Hale as Protector of the Crown," the Empress said. The room fell silent in surprise. The commander stepped forward and bowed deeply. Others followed, their respect genuine. Adrian raised his hands slightly.
"Your Majesty, I didn't do anything special."
"You chose," she said simply. "That is always special." After the ceremony ended, Adrian found himself standing beside the large observation window again. Outside, stars stretched endlessly, calm and distant. The Empress joined him quietly. "You look uncomfortable," she said. "I don't like being the center of attention," he admitted. She nodded. "Neither do I sometimes." But leadership is not about comfort. They stood in silence for a moment, watching the stars. "Why didn't you run?" she asked softly, repeating the question she had asked earlier during battle. Adrian thought carefully before answering. "When I was younger," he said slowly, "I lost people because everyone waited for the perfect moment to act. No one wanted to risk being wrong. I decided after that if someone needs protection, you don't wait, you just stand."
That sounds simple without interrupting.
"That sounds simple," she said. "It is," he replied. "Simple doesn't mean easy. Marionetta takes it down to the date." She smiled slightly. "Your species continues to surprise me." A long pause followed, comfortable rather than awkward. "The galaxy will hear about today," she said eventually. "Many will speak of a human who stood when others retreated. Some will call it bravery. Others will call it foolishness." Adrian chuckled softly. "Probably both." She turned toward him, her expression warm. "What will you call it?" He thought for a moment, then answered quietly, just doing what felt right. The ship moved forward through space again, leaving behind the battlefield. Repairs continued, and the crew slowly returned to normal routines. Yet something had changed beneath the surface. Guards trained differently now, practicing flexible tactics instead of rigid formations. Conversations about humanity grew more respectful. Adrian noticed subtle shifts everywhere. Warriors who once ignored him now greeted him with nods. Engineers asked for his input when solving problems. Even the commander often sought his opinion during strategy discussions. One evening, while walking through a quiet corridor, Adrian passed a group of young cadets. They stopped and saluted him eagerly. He looked surprised. "You inspired us," one said. Adrian felt embarrassed but smiled slightly. "Just remember, courage isn't about never feeling afraid. It's about choosing what matters more than fear." They nodded, taking his words seriously. Later, he returned to the observation hall once more. The Empress stood there again, as she often did, watching the stars in silence. "The Empire feels different," she said without turning. "Better?" he asked. "Stronger," she replied. "Not because we avoided weakness, but because we faced it." She turned toward him, "And you helped make that possible." He shook his head lightly. "You did. I just stood in the right place."
Hey!
But sometimes history changes because one person chooses the right place to stand. Outside, distant stars shimmered like quiet witnesses. The cruiser moved steadily forward, carrying not just a ruler and her guards, but a new understanding that strength did not always come from power or tradition. Sometimes, strength came from a human who refused to step aside, who stood firm when others calculated survival, and who reminded an entire empire that courage could be simple, honest, and deeply human. And far beyond the cruiser, stories of that moment began to spread across the galaxy, growing into legend. The day an Empress was protected not by the strongest warrior, but by the one who chose to stay when leaving would have been easier.